Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Andy Cahan, Director of Author Events, and I am honored to welcome back our guest this evening. I think those of you familiar with the works of Elizabeth Strout would agree with the reviewer who recently opined that the author is possessed of a magnificent gift for humanizing characters, a gift that is the result of her dedication to her craft. That dedication won Miss Strout the Pulitzer Prize for her 2008 bestseller, Olive Kitteridge, a linked collection of narratives about a woman in coastal Maine, which was later adapted into an Emmy-winning HBO miniseries starring Frances McDormand. As your program notes, Miss Strout is a Faulkner Award finalist and Orange Prize nominee, whose novels include Amy and Isabelle, Abide with Me, and most recently, My Name is Lucy Barton, a #1 New York Times bestseller about an estranged mother and daughter's reconnection, which I suspect is the reason we're all here tonight. Written in tandem with My Name is Lucy Barton, Anything is Possible is a latticework of fiction that fleshes out the lives of the inhabitants of Barton's town of Amgash, Illinois. As Susan Scarf Merrill writes in the Washington Post, these stories return Strout to the core of what she does more magnanimously than anyone else, which is to render quiet portraits of the indignities and disappointments of normal life, and the moments of grace and kindness we are gifted in response. Such a simple goal, so difficult to achieve. Ms. Strout will again be in conversation with my friend and colleague, Laura Kovacs, Associate Director of Author Events and producer of 20th and Vine. Please welcome Elizabeth Strout and Laura Kovacs.
Thank you. It's really, really, really wonderful to be here, and thank you all for showing up.
I cannot believe my fortune to be able to talk to you again. I really appreciate it. I want to say at the outset to the audience, I will be extremely careful with the spoilers, and there will be none on my watch. What made you
There may be some of mine.
We'll be careful. What made you want to present a wider angle view of the town where Lucy Barton grew up?
I think it wasn't even like I wanted to. It wasn't like I thought, oh, I'm going to do this. It's that when I was writing My Name is Lucy Barton and I would, hear the mother and the daughter talking about these different people, then I just would get interested because they're people. And I just think people are so interesting. And so I would think, oh, wait, let's just think what happened to Kathy Nicely? So I would scribble some scenes about what had happened to Kathy Nicely. And then I would think, well, what happened to Mississippi Mary? And so I would scribble some scenes. So that's how it started.
Last time we talked, my closing question to you was, have we heard the last from Olive Kitteridge? So I've been pretty embarrassed. Do you think this book stands alone?
Yeah, I do. I think it absolutely stands alone. Yep.
It's difficult. It's difficult sometimes for readers to divorce themselves from the idea that you're writing about yourself, that you are Lucy Barton. What do you say to those readers?
Well, I'm not Lucy Barton, but I understand the impulse for people to feel that. And I also, I am a part of Lucy Barton because I'm a part of every single character that I write, whether it's male or female, and that's just the truth of it. And some I have a little more connection with for different reasons, but Lucy Barton's background was not my background. My parents were educators, and they were educated. It just wasn't my background at all, but I felt like once I discovered her voice, I felt like I really could know her, and did know her. So.
The novel examines how the past shapes us, our roles in other people's lives, and our understanding of ourselves based on those roles. What part does gossip play in the book, both for you in terms of moving the story along and for your characters as a way of relating to each other?
Well, in Anything is Possible, I'm not particularly aware of gossip playing a big role in that book because I think that the people have come forward and have their own center stage so much that it's not like in My Name is Lucy Barton, that is gossip. The mother and the daughter are gossiping. It's their form of love. It's their form of communion or communication. And so that's more, I think, a My Name is Lucy Barton kind of issue than in Anything is Possible.
How do you approach presenting characters just as they are, not good or bad,
Yeah.
no melodrama? How do you avoid judgment?
Well, because I just do. Because because I realized, like, it came to me a number of years ago that one of the things that I love about writing is that when I go to the page, I don't, I suspend judgment. And in real life, I'm probably just as judgmental as the next person, because that's how we maneuver through the world. We just become judgmental, which is so tiresome. But, we do and we are. And yet when I go to the page, I just don't care. I just have an open heart for my characters. And so it's a wonderful thing. It's very freeing, and it allows me to just report on what people are doing, because that's my job, is to just show us what we're all up to, or what some of us are up to, and so and if I can rise above it and love them, which I do, I love all my characters, that's just me, then I feel that I can write without melodrama, because melodrama is like good or bad. And in what I'm trying to do, I'm not interested in whether they're good or bad. I'm interested in the crevices of all those in-between spaces that most of us live in. And so that's how I think I avoid melodrama.
It's definitely not true of every character in the book, but it does seem that for some characters, in order to reinvent themselves, they need to move away to New York, to Italy. Can you talk about the emotional significance of place?
Right. Well, place is very, very important, because everybody comes from a place. We all come from a place, and we all live in a place, and we live in a time in history and a place in history. So time and place in history is essential to any character. So whether one is comfortable in their place of origin or uncomfortable is part of their character makeup. But place is just important, because that's what we are.
One thing that was so vivid to me in this book are your descriptions of the landscape, the wide open fields at different times of year, the trees, the flowers. Can you talk about the art of creating setting and how the setting serves the story?
Yeah, well, this book is in the Midwest, again, as My Name is Lucy. Well, My Name is Lucy Barton was in New York, but she came from the Midwest. And so this is in the Midwest. And it was the reason that I put My Name is Lucy Barton in the Midwest is because as I started to write it, and I started to realize, okay, let's have the mother never have been on an airplane before. That's interesting. Let's try that. And then, like, as I understood more and more about Lucy, then all of a sudden I saw sky. I just saw that she came from sky, and this little tiny house with sky all around it. And I'd certainly been to the Midwest before, and then once I realized that was what it was going to be, my husband and I went out there. We made a couple of trips out there at different seasons to just drive around for a few days at a time and take in everything, and note exactly how high those soybeans were in May, and how high the corn was in July or whatever. And so it was really interesting. It was very, very interesting. And I have a real sense of the authenticity of that place, because I just do. Sorry.
What is it about the parental relationship that draws you back? And to what extent do you think portraying parental emotion, particularly maternal emotion, is one of the last taboos in fiction?
Well, One of the last taboos.
Well, I'll back that up. There
Yeah.
are some characters that are just shocked to gain this understanding that their mother is anything other than that and has any kind of an interior life at all.
Right. Well, exactly, and that, I think that's part of the answer. I mean, I think mother's an American. I mean, apple pie or something, right? This is still the America that we cling to, and so, but I write fiction, I write literature, so I get to go in there with my little scalpel and poke apart and see what's actually under the surface of these feelings. And I think that, for me, the mother-daughter relationship, or mother-son, as in all of, mothers are just so primal. It's just so basic that, and I write about different mothers and different daughters. It's not always, the same one, but apparently I find it interesting.
I have to ask you this question. In each book, there's a scene where a grown daughter struggles to see her mother as anything else. And both moms are Elvis fans. What is going on here?
Right. That's a good question. And I'll answer it. Who's the second mother?
Well, there's a scene in Lucy Barton where she was surprised her mom had heard of him.
Exactly, I get it. Okay, right. So, so my interest in Elvis came when we took a trip not that long ago to Graceland, and I just went along because I thought, we're here, let's go, and I was, my heart just broke for that man. It just broke for him. I looked at that row of his suits that are all in the hallway, and each one's getting bigger and bigger, and I realized this man died of loneliness. That's what I came out of the house thinking, and I was so affected by that I read that wonderful biography by Peter Girl.
An Elvis biography?
Yes. It's a 2-book biography, and so I just went through actually I read the first part again because I just really went through an Elvis thing.
I married an Elvis fan.
Oh, really?
I did.
That's
He
interesting.
cries in Graceland.
Okay. Well, there we go.
Exactly.
See, I get it.
You address issues of class, gender, poverty, aging. Do you see writing as a political act?
I would fall back on that line and say that the personal is political. So, so when I'm writing about people, then I am writing about political things. Yeah.
Earlier in your career, you described a certain freedom that came from thinking, no one is going to read this, so I might as well write it.
Yeah.
How did that freedom change with fame, the Pulitzer?
Right. I just don't look, Like I write for a reader, but I make the reader up, so it's like an ideal reader, and because I think if I can make people up, I can make up my reader. So I do, and so it's so I'm always thinking about the reader as I'm writing, and I'm thinking like, what does the reader need now, and how can we help the reader? So it's not like I'm not writing for a reader because I am, but at the same time, it's just that reader. It's not everybody. So I don't, so I try not to think about what's getting revealed about myself as I write.
It must be strange then to meet your readers on book tour.
It is. It's pretty wonderful, actually. That's by far the plus side of a book tour is to meet the readers, because I do spend so much time alone with these people that are, I guess they're made up. But yeah, it's nice to meet readers.
Can you talk about how readers find the truest things in good fiction?
How readers find it. I think that readers, I think readers just know. That's my sense. And it was funny because I was talking to a bookseller a number of months ago, and he said he hadn't said much. And then he said, we were talking about like the emotional truthfulness that you need to find in a piece of good fiction or literature. And he said himself, he said, he hadn't said anything, he said, well, the readers just know, don't they? And I said, exactly. They just know. They just know if they're being fed something that's true. I don't think that I can explain it much more than that. And it's sort of like, I think we all know a lot more than we think we know. And we're taught along the way that we don't know things. We're taught to be nice and pleasant and all that kind of stuff, which is fine. I'm not saying we shouldn't be, but that our hearts know things. That's what I think. I hope.
You've been described as a writer who is bracingly unafraid of silences. What draws you to the ways in which people communicate when they can't put what they feel into words? And what are the challenges of bringing those moments to the page? Well,
it's interesting because different cultures have different ways of communicating. And the culture that I came from, which is a very puritanical New England culture, they didn't talk. They just didn't talk much. And so I did. I was always a talky person, but around me there was not the talkativeness that I came to find when I moved to New York, and I found different cultures and and it was just so exciting to find out that people would talk about anything. Really. Almost anything. And so, but my heritage has helped me describe the people that I'm describing, which are really people from my own background, mostly. So I just think I understand how a conversation stops, just stops, and then they all sort of do something, even if it's just wiping the dirt off the wall. Sorry, that's not a spoiler. But so, yeah.
Sarah Payne, who was Lucy's writing teacher in the first book, kept telling her to peel back another layer to get to the real emotional truth. And I didn't know as a reader if you were talking about, because it was a memoir, is it about the therapeutic act of writing for Lucy, or is it about good writing that rings true?
No, it's about good writing that rings true. Who cares about therapeutic stuff for Lucy? I mean,
I've been worried sick about Lucy.
Yeah, don't. She's fine. But I mean, no. It's not, no, yeah. The therapeutic stuff is not, that's not what Sarah Payne was talking about. It was about trying to get at, to express it to a reader. Yeah, I knew I was in trouble when I made Lucy Barton a writer. That was kind of stupid, but.
Well, I wasn't sure if I was going to mention this, but, there was this New Yorker piece last week in which your mom mentioned that your nickname was Whizzle, which was Lucy's nickname, and I thought, oh.
Yeah. Well, we use things from life, and I've always thought that nickname was cute. I liked it, so I used it. I hadn't heard it for years, and I remembered, oh yeah, so I stuck that in, and that's what writers do, or that's what I do. All the different experiences or different things that have come my way, I will pick and choose and use. Right. So.
Your novels have serious themes, but to me there's a vein of humor running through them really often. Are these scenes drawn directly from your own observations?
What, the funny ones?
Mm-hmm.
Which funny one?
We can't say.
I'm sorry, I think that's so funny. What?
We're not allowed to say.
Okay. Right. No, I think I'm glad you think I'm funny. I think I'm funny as well. In my work. And so, but a lot of people don't, but that's okay. But I think it's just my take. It's not necessarily drawn from any real experience as much as just my take on whatever that particular experience is.
This is a writerly question, but what did Sarah Payne mean when she kept saying to Lucy, "We only have one story"?
You know, that's almost a line of regret writing, because I kind of believe it and I kind of don't believe it, and so everybody wants to know: is that me speaking? You know, do I believe what Sarah Payne believes, and am I Sarah Payne, and all that kind of stuff? And it's honestly, I thought Sarah Payne would say this, and she'd say it partly because it sounds good and it sounds almost true, and yet I'm not sure that it's true. You see what I'm saying? So I don't think it's true for me. I don't think I have only one story that I'm writing, although you might disagree, but I mean, I think every writer's work will be connected because it's coming from that one writer, but it did seem something that sounded like Sarah Payne would say it, and it sounded authentic enough to have her say it.
Have books had as much influence on your life that they've had for Lucy?
I think they have. Yeah. From a very young age, I was reading, so-called grown-up books. I remember John Updike's Pigeon Feathers came out when I was I 6 years old, 7 years old? I can't remember, but I was little, and I read it because it was sitting there on the coffee table, and I read it, and it was so interesting because I didn't, understand it in fully, but I certainly got the idea that stuff was going on out there that, it didn't really pay to be a kid, and it was very, very interesting. And I also remember when I read that book, I said something to my mother about John Updike's mother. There must have been a mother in the stories or whatever. And I said, I feel sorry for his mother because I was young and I confused the writer with, the narrator. And my mother said, you don't have to worry about his mother. His mother knows he's a writer and he needs to write whatever he needs to write. And that was an astonishing gift. What a gift to have that in my head growing up. Amazing gift. And I really think that it's a huge part of why I've been able to write the way I have been able to.
In this age of oversharing, so much appears to be said, and yet it doesn't mean people are telling their deepest, darkest secrets.
Yeah.
Does this "don't air your dirty laundry" sensibility exist, or small-town gossip?
Okay, I got the first part of that. I'm not sure.
It seems that so many of the characters kind of define themselves based on their childhood. Lucy often talked about inferiority and superiority, humiliation.
Right.
Does that exist anymore when everything is said online?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, I think it does exist. I'm positive it exists because people are people. And we are always finding ways of putting other people down, and we're succeeding at it a great deal. And there are always people that are feeling humiliated and don't want to. They'll never share that, the deepest humiliations. They're not about to share that. And so I think that, all the social media stuff does not, it can hurt that, but I don't think it, I think they're very different things.
What impact has the library had on your life?
Well, when I was a kid in Durham, New Hampshire, there was the university library, and I would just spend hours. There was a nice children's librarian, and I remember her, and she was very nice, but I also remember that I would always wander off and go out, up the flights of stairs, and I was drawn, just like I was to Pigeon Feathers, I was just drawn to pulling books off the shelves. And what I remember is how some books, the text seemed to rise up and sort of meet me, and other books it didn't. And that was my sense of what a good book was, if the text was coming toward me. And, I read all sorts of things I'm sure I wasn't supposed to have read, but I didn't know what I was reading, but I sure enjoyed it. So, libraries are enormously important, and they're even more and more and more important as our country goes the way it's, they're very important. They're very, very important.
Speaking of, and this will be my last question, and then we'll throw this open to the audience, but can you talk about the importance of federal funding for the arts?
Ooh. Oh.
We can pass.
No, we shouldn't pass at all. I'm just trying to, it's a really serious question. I'm just trying to think of the way to allow it to have the gravitas it deserves. The arts are the only way, not the only way, but they're an enormous way that we can stay civilized. And I don't know that people know that, but I think it's very, very true. And so to support the arts federally, or in any way, but to support them federally, I think is like supporting the foundation of society, in a way.
We here in the world of books feel the same way. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Elizabeth Strout.
Hi, I so enjoy your work, and I did read that article that was mentioned in the New Yorker where your husband was quoted as saying that you are the hardest working person he knows. And I, for one, am really glad, although I'm sure you're exhausted.
I am exhausted, but thank you.
Especially now that Alice Munro has decided that she's hanging up her pen.
Yeah.
I find your writing
Whoops.
in large part, because what is left unsaid speaks volumes to the reader and assumes that we're intelligent enough that we don't need to be spoon-fed.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it makes me love your characters as much as I'm sure everyone here does. I worry about them too. I think about them. Is there any writer that you have been complimented in comparison with? In other words, somebody that it really appeals to you the way that your writing appeals to us, that you feel was a compliment to be compared to?
That's such an interesting question. No. But let me just think. I would have remembered. But thank you. And let me just speak to the one thing that you were talking about, the space that's around the character, so to speak. And I've said before, but I'll say again that I think that every reader brings their own life experience to a book. And so the book is different for every reader, and it should be. And that's very important to me. So when I have this ideal reader, I do respect that ideal reader. And I want them to be, it's an engagement. That's why I said it's like a dance. I want them to be part of it with me. And they can only do that if the spaces are left for them. And My Name is Lucy Barton was particularly porous, more so than my other books for that reason alone. But anyway, thank you. And I'm sorry, I just can't think of anybody.
Forgive me because this is not really a question, but it's a response to a comment that you made earlier about shame. In today's New York Times, there was a very long article about shaming students whose parents were unable to pay for their lunches and they had unpaid bills.
Horrible.
And they would take the food back from these children.
Horrible.
And I sat there and I wondered, who can I call among my friends and get a fund together to fight this, to do something?
Right.
It's outrageous.
It was horrible. It was
and
absolutely horrifying.
This one woman said that the shame never left her son. 20 years later, he refuses to eat peanut butter because of that.
Of course. But of course.
Can you comment further on that and how we can combat this?
Well, I can, yes. It's interesting because the people that I wrote about with My Name is Lucy Barton and some of the people in Anything is Possible are those people or were those people. And when I learned of that article, I realized, when I was growing up, there was always a family or two that was so poor that they were scorned by the rest of the community. But now I began to realize that this has become a larger and larger part of our population. And that article was so horrifying to realize that the scorn that I saw heaped on these families as when I was young has grown and become even more awful. And so I think the country's in real trouble. I think that was my view of that story, was just the sense of systemic horror. It was so awful, so awful. And it's something that everybody should be thinking about. And yeah. Can I just go back to that? Were you comparing me to Alice Munro? It's a total compliment. I will take that. I'm a little slow, but whoa, there we go. That's the answer. Really? Thank you. Sorry.
I love your books, first of all.
Where's this person?
Do you mind waving?
Oh, there you are. Hi.
Yes,
Okay.
hi.
Yeah.
How is it, how can you explain how you became a writer, for what reason, and how did you become a good writer?
Right. Exactly.
Why, and
Right.
what was the overall thought
Right.
in the beginning?
Right. Yep. Well, in the very beginning, I intended to be a very good writer. I really did. I'm actually quite serious. So when I was very small, I think my mother had always wanted to be a writer. I'm not sure, but I think that she probably kind of wanted to be a writer, and she very much encouraged me to write. And she would give me notebooks when I was really little, and she'd say, write down what you did today. So I did. She didn't give them to my brother, but she gave them to me. So I think she saw in me, she'll do this. And I did. And so from a very young age, I thought in terms of sentences. And then there was a brief period when I was maybe 8 or 9 that I thought maybe I'd be a poet, because Edna St. Vincent Millay had come from Maine, and she was a poet. And so that was a little fancy that I had. And then I realized, no, I was going to be a fiction. I mean, I just knew from a very young age that this is what I was going to do. I was going to write Pigeon Feathers. In, my own form. So I really understood that very seriously, and I know that my mother was an enormous part of that, almost unspoken. And also her perceptiveness about the world was something that was so interesting to me, because she saw things that I felt like other people didn't see. And so that was, the beginning of my writing. And then also there was some degree of isolation in my childhood, and that was good for me as a writer, because I learned to develop inner resources. And a writer really needs to have inner resources. So that went along. And then when I became good, so the question is, when did I become good, and why did I become good? And so thank you for thinking I'm good, because it's a little awkward for me to talk about, like, oh, I'm so good. But you asked, so I'll answer. I didn't get good for quite a while, and I just understood that if I kept at it, I could figure it out. And I think that I had to go through a certain number of life experiences to realize, well, for my imagination to be able to be larger and to encompass more things. And then I also had to just do the work of writing. It's like you play scales for, at least 10 years before you can really take off. And I just kept playing the scales and trying the stories and trying the stories. And then it began to get better.
Hi. I have a question that you've sort of piqued my curiosity about when you talked about the process of writing.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in the inception of your characters. Your books are so character rich.
Yeah.
And you talk about relational stories. And then you talked about how you heard the characters talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
what's the inception of it? Do you create this story, or do you hear a story and that story becomes what you are going to tell?
Right. Exactly. First of all, I almost always start with people, because like I said, people are so interesting to me, and I am completely character driven, and I know that. And so it's always a person. It might be the way the sun is slanting under the door that will trigger something for me, but usually it'll be a person that it triggers, So I'm very aware that people are what it is that I want to be writing about. And so and it arrives in different ways. They'll arrive in different ways, and it's a little hard to explain, because I do sketches. I just put pieces of scenes. I'll write pieces of scenes, and the ones that I understand that don't work, they just get dumped. And so if I have enough scenes left on the table that have what I call a heartbeat, I think, well, that has a heartbeat, that can stay. And then I begin to think, okay, let's think more about this character. And so I never write from beginning to end. I don't write anything from beginning to end, not a story, not a book. And I don't think I ever have. And so that's helps me figure out who this person is as I proceed. And some people appear more fully formed, and then other people, I have to dig a little bit more. And it's always interesting to me when the book is in its final covers, and I think, Tommy Guptill, look at you. Where'd you come from? But I know where he came from. He came, but it's like, oh, Tommy, look at you, sitting there in the car. But, it's fun. It's a funny thing. So it's sort of sidle up sideways sometimes.
To your point about where your characters come from, do you find that you wake up in the morning and they are more fully alive?
I find that morning is the best time for me to work. That's certainly true. And that, I think, is because the more real life interactions that I have during the day, the further away my work is taken from me. It's just natural, because it's imaginative. And so if I can have my quiet space in the morning, then, and not have to have any interactions with people, then that's when I can work best. So it's not like I wake up and they're sitting there waiting, but they're sitting over there waiting, and then they come over. Yeah.
So what did you think of the HBO version of?
Yeah, I thought they did a wonderful job, and I was so pleased when I saw it, because I realized, first of all, wow, that could have not worked, which somehow hadn't occurred to me, but it did. I thought it did work, and I thought they did a wonderful job.
I first fell in love with your writing, reading Amy and Isabelle a long time ago. And I was wondering, what is your thinking about how your approach and your thinking about the mother-daughter relationship has evolved through your books and as we've gotten older? And if you could talk a little bit about that, thinking about all the mother-daughter relationships in each of your books, starting with Amy and Isabelle.
Right. Yeah, I feel like I was a kid when I wrote Amy and Isabelle, but I wasn't. I was in my late 30s. When I wrote that, which now seems practically like a kid, but anyway. But yeah, that had started as a story which never got published, thank goodness, and then I just kept growing, So that was the first mother-daughter thing, and I think I felt, that was my first experience of feeling equally for both of those characters, and that was a helpful experience to have. Like I realized, okay, and then when I wrote the line, but Isabelle had her own story, then I realized, oh my God, she does. Yay! So that was very, wonderful. And they both had their own story. So, and it's funny because my daughter was 16 when that book came out. No. Yeah, she was 16 when the book came out. And because I was 41 when the book came out, 43 when the book came out. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is it took forever. But she was 16 when the book came out, and it was funny because everybody said, oh, well, that's going to be your daughter, because my daughter has this wonderful hair that, was all wavy and lovely. And it wasn't my daughter. My daughter was like a baby when I was first writing that. And Isabelle was not my mother, and, I wasn't Isabelle, but there was some part of having been a mother and being a daughter that informed that work. And then as I got older and just got more interested in other, everybody's got a mother or something, got a situation, shall we say. Then I just freed myself up a little bit to write more in different variations of that theme. I'm sure, because, we all change. It's so interesting. It's like when you read the same book like 5 years later, you realize, oh my God, it's such a different book, because you're different. It's so interesting. And then you read it 5 years later again, and you go, I can't believe this is the same book that I read twice before. It's just, so, yeah.
I was curious, what are some of the authors and some of the books that impacted you in your whole life? Like
right.
the best books you ever read?
Right. I will say that I think every good book I read has influenced me, but I was really influenced by Alice Munro and William Trevor. And those two writers were like bookends for me, because I just think their writing was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And Trevor is so delicate and sort of light-touched, and Alice Munro has such authority that she brings to the page, and they were very good, counterparts for me. And then I loved all the Russians. I just love the Russians. And you talk about reading a book 5 years later, you read Anna Karenina or even War and Peace, you just think, oh, look at this book. It's so different than what I thought. It's just fabulous. So I've always thought the Russians knew an awful lot about the human heart. Whew. And said it. And said all sorts of things to each other. My goodness. And then Virginia Woolf, has been important. I love Philip Roth, John Updike.
You talked about creating space for the reader so that there's an exchange, and you render your characters so fully, and this is a little bit of a writerly question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, when you come to understand your characters so well that they become intuitive, how do you keep your understanding of them separate from the readers in order to create the right amount of space for the reader?
Right. I don't do that consciously. It's not a conscious thing. So it's not like I say, well, I have to back off to let the reader know more. It's just I just do that. I do that intuitively. So, and it's not until after it's done that I realize I've done it. Like when My Name is Lucy Barton, I said that was a particularly porous book. That was more porous than my other books, is how I think of it, because the reader can really move in or not. They don't have to, but and it wasn't until I was done with that I realized that was true about it, and that it was essential for that book. So it's not. It's just something I know that I do, but I can't tell you how I do it.
Hello. I really admire the structuring of your work. I'm so struck by how in Olive Kitteridge the various stories contribute to a really prismatic, fully fleshed out vision of this woman, while each individual story completely stands on its own and it belongs to its narrator on its own merits.
Right.
And in many ways, I feel like Lucy Barton is a reciprocal in which we are located in one place for the duration of the book, and yet we have this wide lens into an outer world. I was just hoping to hear from you a little bit about how you deal with structure in that regard, and especially Lucy Barton being in a stasis, keeping the momentum, keeping a breath.
Right. Structure, the form of a book is like the book itself. I think in Lucy Barton she says style is substance. She hears that in college, and she said, but I didn't know yet what that meant. And style is substance, so that the style of the book is the book. The story that you're trying to tell is the form that the story is in, because otherwise there's no story. So, for example, The Burgess Boys is a very different kind of form from Olive Kitteridge. It's a thicker, heavier, denser book, and it has a much more sort of straightforward narrative, and it's in some ways a little bit more traditional. And that's because that story, I felt, required that form. And with Olive Kitteridge, like, I understood right away that she's episodic. That's how I saw her. I thought, wait a minute, she's going to be episodic because she's so powerful in herself that I thought, you know, the reader doesn't want to see her on every single page of this book. It's going to be too much. And so I understood right away that I would be telling stories about Olive and stories about other people in town that knew Olive, because I loved the point of view. So that came to me rather right away with Olive, which is very, very helpful, because if you understand the form that the book is, you're halfway home. Because much of figuring out how to write it is what is the form? What's the form going to take? And with My Name is Lucy Barton, you know, I kept pushing it to the side because it was different. It was just a different style for me, and it was a first-person narrative, and it was this fine voice, and I just didn't really know what to do with it. And then I finally realized, well, I'm just going to have to tell her story in that voice. So I did. But, you know, your question is a good one, because you can tell a story many, many different ways, but the only way it's going to be the real story that it is in the form that it takes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. I love your writing, like I'm sure everyone here. And since you've written such a body of works, I'm just wondering, as you look at that all, if any of them are closer to your heart, or how you think of them differently.
Right. You know, I was thinking about that the other day, just ever so briefly, and I think that the one that I've written the most recently is the one that's closest to my heart, because it's the most vulnerable in my mind, you know, out there, new in the world. And so, at the moment, that's my spot. You know, I know writers that can say, well, this is my favorite book, or this is the worst one I wrote, or something. I can't say that. Exactly. Well, I only have one child. Whew. And I'm absolutely crazy about her, so there we go. That works out really well. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a little. I just, you know, I can't tell you which one I like best, because they're different, and I know what I went through to get each one. So, you know, but.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all very, very much. Thank you so much.